welcome all the people who've joined the call. I'm here with Vicki Burns, Janine Gibson with Hogwatch Manitoba. I'm an organic verification officer living on a small cooperative farm south of Steinbach. The power that's running this camera is from the sun, so we're all solar and wind here on our co-op. So really happy to be with Vicki and our other speakers today, talking about some of the unseen costs of the hog industry in Manitoba. So for those of you that have joined us on our earlier webinars, thank you for returning. And for those of you that are joining us for the first time, thank you for keeping yourselves muted. And you can feel free to turn your camera on or off as you like. Sometimes it's easier for our speakers to share what they have to share if they see the faces that are listening. But we'd ask you to direct any questions or comments in the chat, and we'll be responding. Vicki and I will be monitoring the chat and responding to your questions, and referring you to other references. And so we just ask that we may have to mute everyone if there's any issues. There may be some technical delays. Vicki's saying the wind is pretty high in Winnipeg, so please be patient if there are technical delays. Yeah. But we welcome everyone who's joined us. It's just a little before the hour. I just like to welcome people ahead of time. Thank you for keeping your microphone on mute unless you're one of our speakers, and then you'll be able to unmute yourself and share what you have to say. And we welcome that. We welcome comments in the chat. Feel free to make comments or ask questions in the chat. And we also direct you, we have resources on our hogwatchmanitoba.ca website. So please go there for our email addresses to contact us for more information or to make donations. We have, Vicki's our treasurer of Hogwatch Manitoba. I'm the secretary. Our president is Fred Tate, but Fred is not he's very grounded in the real world, not so much this virtual reality. So not with us this evening. But you can find more about us on our website, hogwatchmanitoba.ca. So thank you all for your interest in this topic and for joining us this evening. We are recording so that folks that can't be with us tonight can review our discussion and also review what we talked about on April 14th and April 21st as well. So welcome all. As I said earlier, my name is Janine Gibson. I work as an organic verification officer through my own business, Creative Health Consulting, and live in Hanover, highest hogs per hectare in Western Canada. So I try to be a good neighbor and try to help my neighbors be good neighbors. And this has led me to being an activist with Hogwatch Manitoba. And through that work, I've come to work very closely in different capacities with Vicki Burns, who was with Winnipeg. You may have known her through her work with Winnipeg Humane Society. And then, oh, Vicki, I meant to write down the Lake Winnipeg, which is
Save Lake Winnipeg Project.
Right, the Save Lake Winnipeg Project. That's what Vicki's working on, and that's what she's speaking to us tonight. My apologies. I will, as a pitiful excuse, say this is my 5th Zoom call today, Vicki. It's kind of a crazy, wild time in the world of sustainable agriculture, which is wonderful because you had a link there. You know, more and more people are understanding that how we do agriculture has an impact on the environment. It has an impact on climate change. It has an impact on the animals that we raise and the whole biosphere, ourselves included. And that kind of holistic vision is what Vicki has always represented to me. So Vicki, thank you so much for speaking to us this evening. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Janine. I'm just going to share my screen and
Well, while you're doing that, I'll welcome the newcomers to the call. I think we have now just short of 35 people on the call. So welcome all. This is the third in the series by Hogwatch Manitoba, and Vicki Burns is starting. I've just introduced her and she's about to present. So here we go.
And now can you see my screen?
Yes, I can. Thank you very much.
Okay, good. Thank you, Janine. First, I'd like to acknowledge that today I'm joining you from Treaty 1 territory, the original lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, and Dakota peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. And so thanks so much for joining us tonight. As Janine has already mentioned, this is the third in the series of 3 webinars on the hidden costs of industrial pork production in Manitoba. In the first 2 webinars, we talked about, first of all, the issue of antibiotic resistance. And the second one was all about the impacts of living close to hog factories. And tonight we're going to be focusing on the problem of blue-green algae in our lakes. And how is that connected to the expansion of the hog industry that has occurred in the last 25 years in Manitoba? So what I'm going to be talking about is the history of the expansion of in Manitoba and how that coincides with the growth of the large blue-green algae blooms in our lake. And finally, what Hogwatch Manitoba is proposing that we should do. But before I start on that really important connection that I want to focus on tonight, I do want to acknowledge that we understand that human sewage, and particularly the sewage from the city of Winnipeg, is a big part of the problem. The sewage effluent that comes out of the city of Winnipeg is actually the single largest point source of phosphorus anywhere in the Lake Winnipeg watershed. It accounts for anywhere from 6 to 8% of the phosphorus that gets into the lake. And so I don't want people to accuse us of not acknowledging that that's a problem. It is a problem and it needs to be addressed. But tonight we're going to talk about the non-point source of phosphorus. And that is the phosphorus and nitrogen actually, that's spread all over the land, all over the Lake Winnipeg watershed. Maybe what I should be pointing out is that there's a big difference between point source and non-point source. The point source is what comes out of the end of a pipe. So any kind of sewage effluent usually is what is a point source. The non-point source is the phosphorus and the nitrogen that's spread on the land as fertilizer, or in a small way, just natural. It ends up running off the landscape during the snow melting or big rain events, and it gets into our ditches and creeks and ends up going up into Lake Winnipeg and in some other prairie lakes. Now, the reason why we're so concerned about the hog industry is because hog manure contains a lot of phosphorus and nitrogen, which are both really essential elements for anything that grows. And so they're actually very important for any kind of fertilizer. And that's why hog manure is considered to be a good fertilizer. The problem is that when too much is put on the land and whatever crop is growing cannot take up all that phosphorus or nitrogen, it becomes available to run off, getting into the ditches and creeks that I've already mentioned to you. And phosphorus and nitrogen are what feeds and causes to grow the blue-green algae blooms that we're getting too much of. One of the, actually, I just want to divert for a minute and point out that here at Hogwatch Manitoba, here's a couple of pictures that show you what kind of hog industry we wish that we had here and that we're hoping to move towards. And that is where the animals are treated humanely. They're kept on straw, sometimes allowed outside. So it's basically an ethically, environmentally, and economically sustainable, not like the huge industrial barns that we currently have. The problem that comes with all this blue-green algae, this is just quite an important image that I'm sure lots of you have already seen, but this is happening every year. This was at Victoria Beach a number of years ago, but it's happening all over the lake. in various degrees, and it's not just a nuisance. It really is a serious health problem, which I'll talk about later. Now, one of the historic problems that is part of this manure situation is that the manure has been applied to the land based on how much nitrogen the crops need. But this builds up too much phosphorus in the soils because there's a lot more phosphorus in the manure than what that crop needs. It needs the amount of nitrogen in that manure, but it doesn't need as much phosphorus as there is. And that is why we see such a buildup of phosphorus in our soils, and then it becomes available to run off whenever there's these big rainstorms, and particularly when the snow melts. Now, another factor is that in Manitoba, we have a very, very high density of pigs per farm. This is a big chart. You probably can't read all the numbers easily. It came from Statistics Canada, but it shows that in 2020, last year, the average number of pigs per farm here in Manitoba was 5,563. The next highest average in any other province, and in Quebec, which is the second highest hog producing province in Canada, was only 2,350. So we've almost got 2.5 times as many pigs per farm. Now, the problem with that is that many pigs in a small space creates a huge amount of manure that you have to get rid of. And yes, it is a good fertilizer when it's applied in the right amount, but we know that there's more manure to be disposed of in many places than they have the land base to do it properly. It's widely accepted in the hog industry that it's just simply too expensive to be transporting this liquid manure for over large distances, and therefore these huge farms need a whole bunch of land base around them to properly spread. And we're hearing all kinds of stories of places where that's not happening properly. One other thing I want to point out from this slide is if you look at 1991, way back in 1991, the average number of pigs per farm was only 434. So let's just remember that difference. In 91, 434, now over 5,500 per farm. So that is a really graphic example of the intensification of this industry. And the more it intensifies, the more offsetting problems there are. Now I want to just once again point out the huge jump in the number of pigs that are being produced in Manitoba. This graph came from the Manitoba government. Way back, it goes all the way back to 1936 and goes up to, I think, 20. Actually, I can't see the end of it there, but I think it's close to 2020. Back in 1936 in Manitoba, we were producing maybe a couple of 100,000 pigs at the most. And it gradually crept up a little bit, but you can see here in 1990, it was up about maybe 1.5, getting close to 2 million. From 90 to 95 and up until 2000, it really jumped. Look at that huge jump, up to almost 8 million pigs a year. And that is actually the same time frame as the blue-green algae blooms in Manitoba really got problematic. Now, I want to show you this graph is also produced by the government of Manitoba. And this is kind of neat. It shows you the amount of phosphorus that has accumulated at the bottom of the lake, in the sediments of the lake. And it goes all the way back to 1920, which I'm just amazed that they can do this. Scientists can just dig down and they take a core sample from the bottom of the lake. And from that core sample, they can tell approximately how much phosphorus was deposited into the lake every year. So back in 1920, there was a small amount, maybe 0.50. I think it's, actually, I can't read it Anyway, it's a small 0.50. It remained about steady up until maybe 1970, where it started to increase a tiny bit. But look at what happened in 1990. It had increased a fair amount from way back in 1920, but between 1990 and up until about 95, which as far as the graph goes, it's almost tripled in that short period, that amount of phosphorus. And you have to remember, phosphorus primarily and nitrogen is what is feeding these blue-green algae blooms. So that is why we're so concerned about how the hog industry is part of the problem. They're not the only part of the problem, but they are a significant part of the problem, we believe. Now, probably some people are saying, well, wait a sec, aren't there regulations here in Manitoba about spreading manure, how you're supposed to do it, and the application rates and so on? Yes, it's true that there are regulations, but the regulations are not good enough and they're not being enforced. For example, the amount of phosphorus that can be applied to any piece of land is actually approximately 4 times more than what that crop might take up in that year. The idea of that being done is that the hog producer would not then apply a manure to that particular land for another 3 years. And this also is dependent on assuming that these producers are able to get soil samples and be very scientific about how much their crop is going to need to take up. Manure can be applied anytime between April 10th and November 10th. Sometimes in special circumstances, the government will allow it to be applied either earlier in the season or later in the season. This year, for example, I saw that they were allowing hog producers to put their manure on their fields as early as March 23rd. I guess because it had been so dry and there was no snow left. But remember, then we had that fairly major snowstorm over a lot of southern Manitoba between April 11th and April 13th. So it's highly likely that a lot of that, if they had already spread their manure, a lot of that would end up running off and getting into the waters. They can't just hang on to this manure forever, because the lagoon that it's being held in is getting, fills up. So it has to be emptied in order to make room for further production. In the Netherlands, I'm led to believe that they actually have manure police because they take this so seriously, but we have nothing like that. We're often are heard that there's very, very few inspectors and so on. Now, to finish off, I want to make the point that this actually is a problem that we could measure, and we could get fairly scientific data on how much of a problem the hog industry is contributing. The reason we can measure it is we can actually take water samples from ditches and creeks and measure how much phosphorus is in those, and then we can we would take a sample at the top of the field, for example, at the upstream part of the field where the hog manure is being applied, so that you get a sense of how much phosphorus was already in it. And then you take another sample at the downstream after this ditch or stream has flowed, past the field, and see how much phosphorus was actually contributed. The sampling could be done by either paid staff and or trained volunteers, just like the Lake Winnipeg Foundation citizen-based water monitoring program. And the samples would be analyzed at an accredited lab, and there would have to be some scientific input to sort of figure out how much flow there had been and so on. But this is absolutely a measurable problem. They're doing it in all kinds of other locations. So we at Hogwatch have proposed this idea to the Minister of Agriculture in Manitoba twice now. We had a meeting with some of the faculty at the Agriculture Department at the University of Manitoba. We sent letters to private corporations, Maple Leaf and High Life, who like to brag that they have really sustainable practices. And we also have communicated with Manitoba Pork, suggesting that this would be a very concrete way to get an answer to this question: how much is the hog industry contributing to the problem of Lake Winnipeg? Well, are you surprised to find that we have had no positive response? Given that this government often says they want to have evidence-based policy, why are they not willing to collect the data which would provide the evidence upon which we could build reasonable policy? Regarding the lack of response from the corporations and from Manitoba Pork, I tend to think that they just don't want to have the data which would dispute their claim that they're really not part of the problem. Now, this next slide was actually a combination of the two I just showed you, because I just wanted to make the point that if you flip the first one about phosphorus over, you would see that it matches very much the slide about the history of pig production in Manitoba. Now, to finish, I want to just make the point of why do we really need to pay attention to this? Well, these blue-green algae blooms that I'm talking about, they're not just a nuisance. Some of them, not all of them, but a fair number of them do contain significant toxins that can make people sick, and they can cause animals sick. They can actually, there's been numerous cases of dogs who actually die after going into the water with blue-green algae, because you know how dogs lick their fur when they get out, and that means they're ingesting a lot of these toxins, and there's no treatment. Once, you know, usually we've heard of several cases of dogs dying within a couple of hours. So these are just some examples of how they can make you sick. The one that I'm most concerned about, well, all of them are concerning, but the neurotoxins, which affect the nervous system, are really significant. There's more research now about this BMAA, which there's consideration that there's a fairly certain link between people who have a lot of exposure to BMAA and those who are getting ALS, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's. I mean, this is very, very serious stuff. In Australia, the United States, and even here in Canada, there's a lot more research about this. So it seems to me, and we actually know that there is BMAA present in some of the Lake Winnipeg blooms, because we've had research done on those by Dr. Eva Pipp, who was formerly of the University of Winnipeg, and by Susan Murch from the University of BC. They've taken water samples for several years and have found evidence of BMAA. So it really seems to me that we need to be taking this much more seriously. Just one more thing, in Florida, where they have a big problem with blue-green algae in some of their waterways, they're actually starting to warn people to be careful about breathing in the air if they're near any of these blooms, because they're discovering that some of the toxins can become airborne. So I just want to say that in conclusion, this really is a measurable problem. We don't have to be pointing fingers at each other. We really can measure where the phosphorus is coming from and then do something about it. And it's surely the health of our beautiful lakes and all of the life that depends on it. We can't just be letting that go for the sake of some increased tax dollars. So anyway, I can rant on and on for ages about this, but I'm going to stop now, and thank you for your attention. And if you have questions, please put them in the chat. And now I'd like to introduce two elders who are joining us from Peguis, Floyd and Faylene Sutherland. And Floyd, I'll just tell you a little bit about each of them, although I've never met them, but I'm so grateful to you for taking the time to spend with us. Floyd has been a safety officer in Peguis since 1995. He's an instructor and trainer for safety training such as Red Cross programs and wilderness remote first aid. His work history includes being with the Canadian Armed Forces and policing. He serves as an elder for the Peguis A1 Care Center and Peguis Chief and Council. And Faylene has worked at the Peguis Child and Family Services, at the Peguis School, as a guidance teacher from at the school, as an elder for the Brandon University, as a peer council for Brandon University. So there's a really so many things that that you've contributed in your community, and I'm sure much further. And I appreciate so much that you are willing to spend some time with us, bringing your wisdom and knowledge as elders and your experience. So I'd like to welcome you now, and so please take over, and you'll have to unmute yourself, I think.
Vicki, do you want to stop sharing your screen?
Yes.
Thank you so much for that presentation. I really enjoyed it.
Bonjour, Annie. My name is Keewatio Benisi, and I'm from the Turtle Clan. Along with, she shared some of my academic world, but my main is being Ogichitakwe. That means that I am a one, that carries many teachings for our young people. And people call this water protectors. And I run ceremonies for water and women's lodges, so it's very important that we teach how sacred the water is, and water is life. It's so important for all of us to have clean water, as we are all aware, like many First Nations have that big concern. And my dad was a fisherman. My brother is still a fisherman, and so we know of all the atrocities that our water system has gone through, and it's still going through. When I was growing up along the riverbanks of Fish River, we used to have many kinds of water life, and like turtles and snails and crayfish. None of that is there anymore because of pollution and contamination of our water systems. And growing up, there used to be a family of loons living just around the corner from our home, and we would hear them. Those have been gone for many, many years. And but this past year, we sat by a sacred fire. There's a sacred fire lit in our community. It's been going for over a year, because of the pandemic that we're in. And we were sitting there one evening, and a loon flew over, and it was such a moment for us, that this bird was coming to live amongst us again. And I think it's mainly because everybody in the world has to stay still. As human beings, we're the ones that are bringing all of this devastation to Mother Earth. And as a Gichitakwe, I believe that I'm one of those women, that have been sharing the responsibility that we have as human beings to make sure that water is kept clean, not only for our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren, but for future generations. And every day, we do water songs, water ceremonies, praying that our water stays clean. And when the moratorium of the pig farms came, like, I'm one that hasn't really been involved in in following, who is part of destroying our earth, and the waters. But there are young people did a study as part of their schooling on our river, Fishery River, and it was very, very contaminated, from the farms along the river and all of that flowing into our water system. And as when all of the, when the province put in some regulations and governance on how to do things a little different, the water has improved a little bit. But if, it starts again, I'm sure that we're going to be still in a big situation where we're not going to have water, to be used as we normally used to use it. We used to be able to swim. We can't do those things because of rashes, because of illness. It's so polluted. And our beach, it's along, it's not far from where we live. I grew up in Fisher, so we're along the lake. The beaches were so beautiful and clean. Now, because of everything that, all the dams, that caused all of the water levels to rise, there's no beaches there. There isn't any at all because it's all washed away. And when we were down there, and watching all of this stuff in the water that's floating there that people rarely go in because of all the poison that has been placed there. And it makes me really sad, that our great-grandchildren, and we have 44, are not going to be able to have the things that I had when I was growing up. And for us, water is the most important medicine that we were given as human beings, to make sure that we stay healthy. And we are born in water, and so it's very important that we have water that is safe, and we have a teaching that we always like to share. Peguis is part of Treaty 1 territory, and it's very important that we respect the earth, because one of the teachings that we are told, that there'll be a time when our rivers will die if we're not to take our responsibilities to make sure that they're looked after. And listening to this information, and I'm sure we'll be thinking about it. And I have been reading quite a bit this past month or so regarding, all the concerns around the farming, and talking to other people that are aware of, the damage to the earth. And some of you has probably heard of a young man that's from our community that's a strong activist, Mike Sutherland. He's always so worried and makes sure that that message is always there. And he'll use many ways, to make sure that he's listened to. And he's a big activist for making sure that our water and our land and our trees are taken care of.
Bonjour, my name is Keewatio Benisi, and I'm from the Elk Clan. Us too, we had to learn about the water, and every year we do they call it the sun dance or a thirst dance, where we go without water for 4 days. We don't drink or eat for 4 days, and we pray that that water will be looked after properly. And until you do that, that's the only time you really respect the water and how important that water is for life. Because everything needs that water to live. The birds, the animals, the trees, everything needs that water, good, healthy water. And as you know, as we're going along, we notice too as we hunt, there's a lot of the ducks that are not, that don't come back no more. You know, the wood ducks along the river. Those are all gone. Just a few here and there might come in once in a while, but before we used to have a lot of those. And like my wife said, you know, along the rivers, you know, we used to could see the bottom of the river. Now we can't. It's just polluted. And you know, so us too, we try hard to keep the area clean, so that life will be restored. But again, you know, we've seen quite a bit. I shouldn't say quite a bit. Some change in the water, and now you're starting to see the little worms and some of the bugs in some of the water. Also, there's other ones that harvest the peat moss. That's ones that, you know, the peat moss that filters the water for us that come on the land. So, you know, the states had a bunch of them coming down and taking that peat moss. And that peat moss takes a long time to grow. You know, they say, well, give it 10 years and it'll be out back. And we know that's not true. You know, and where Peguis is, we stay in a basin where it's a lot lower than all the areas and south of us, while the hog farms are. It flows right into our reserve, into Lake Winnipeg. And you know, we've seen all the stuff, that erosion that took place with the water coming in and the land, you know, along the shores where we used to swim. That's not there no more. You know, and it's such a big change in, you know, the last 70 years. You know, it's something that
We used to be able to harvest our medicines out of the river. You know, there's a medicine that in our language is called wike. It's a natural antibiotic, but because of all the chemicals and all the pesticides and everything that farmers use, you know, it's killed that medicine. And it's a natural antibiotic, you know, and not very many places that we will be able to get some. And most of the time we have to travel to go and find these places for harvesting medicines, natural medicines, because those are being destroyed. You know, that those were placed on the earth for our use, and we're killing them, and we're not going to have those around as well. And one of the teachings that is so very sacred to us, you know, when we look at taking care of Mother Earth, we are told that the earth is the ashes of our ancestors. So we need to be respectful in taking care of her and how she provides everything for us. You know, our food, our buildings, the lumber. Even when we build our lodges, you know, it's the willows. And our water is always used in every ceremony. You know, we were just in the city yesterday meeting with young people, and we shared with them about how important water is, and it's so hard to find. See, for us, we're not used to drinking, is it chlorine that's in the water in the city or something? It doesn't taste natural to us, you know, but for us, we have an artesian well where our water comes from, and it's dug deep into the earth. And we live in swampland. You know, when we were moved off our lands in the Selkirk area, we moved to swampland. So it's when the water overflows, you know, and chemicals come in, it soaks into our soil. So a lot of our water in our homes, you know, they're usually contaminated, you know, after a while because of all the chemicals that flow into the land, and our land is not solid like most places. We're living on peat moss, you know, so there's a lot of things that we have to take a look at, and And I know that we all have to make a living somehow. My husband and I are still working. We're working on the wellness team. And but we need to do these kind of things in a respectful way and not in a way that's going to kill our lakes, our water systems, and our plants and wildlife. Unfortunately, we rely on them, but they don't rely on us for their lives, you know, and we got to stop this pollution or come to some way of managing it in a different way that it's not going to be fatal to our people and the children in our future.
Yeah, in the places too, you know, north of us, if we want to do anything with the creeks or there, we have to notify the neighbors north of us to let them know what's happening. Yet in the south, they don't let us know, and they build more drainage ditch right into the river. It's called the Fisher River, and they have more drainage going in there now that flowed right through our reserve, and a lot of it stays there and goes right into Lake Manitoba, Lake Winnipeg, because we're right in between the interlake. And you know, from way back, you know, we start seeing the difference. You know, the trappers and the hunters, they all seen the change, and where there's less and less animals. And to us, you know, that's kind of hard to take when you used to see, like even around our house here, sometimes we have moose, you know, that come by, and deer, and had rabbits that come around here, and some years there's none. It's something. What's killing them off, or not letting them come back here, or they're just a whole lot smarter than we think they are. So,
So with that, I say miigwech for listening, and if you have any questions for us, we're more than happy to answer. As you know, we are the Red Nation, the Indigenous people are considered the caretakers of the earth, and it's a very important role for us as a people. Our little ones are taught those things right from when they start coming into ceremony. We're always teaching them about how important it is to take care of Mother Earth and how to be respectful to her. Like, we cannot spit on the ground because we are spitting on our ancestors and our mother who looks after us. Miigwech.
Thank you both
thank
so
you.
much for what you've shared.
Yes, miigwech to both of you. It's just really powerful to hear how you describe these things that are really so important to all of us. Now, we're supposed to hear from Gordon. Is Gordon on the call? I can't see.
Yes,
Oh,
I am.
there
Can
he
you
is.
hear me?
Oh, there he is. Okay. Well, Gordon, I'll hand it over to you to explain what how you're going to contribute tonight. But thanks so much for being here.
Okay. Vicki asked me to talk a bit about my experience on Lake Winnipeg over the last 60 plus years. We've always had a cottage, and every summer, I think of my life, I have gone. Thinking back as a child, I remember there has been an algae problem, but not anything like we're seeing now. I remember the long strands of algae that would attach to the rocks and make the rocks slippery, but there was never a time that you felt you couldn't go in the water. And I like to swim, and I go in pretty much every day. We have a cottage at Lester Beach now, which is near Grand Beach and Victoria Beach. And I've seen approximately the last 20 years now where we have times in the summer where we're getting that pea soup kind of, it looks like green paint. The water is so thick. The picture that Vicki showed of Victoria Beach was, I think, after the algae bloom had passed and deposited itself on the beach because the water behind that was still blue. But when you have an algae spill, if you've never seen it, it's literally like a can of green paint, totally thick. So over the years, we've seen this. We've wondered why it's occurring more often. And we thought for a while that it was related to the temperature. As the summers were getting hotter, there seemed to be more algae. From my experience, I'm seeing that it occurs after heavy rains. Last year was not a bad year. We were wondering what would happen. Would we have a lot of the algae blooms again? And we really didn't have many until later on in the fall. And again, that's when the rains started. So there does seem to be some correlation to the runoff from whether it's from the barns, whether it's from the city, that's causing this at these times to occur. So as a swimmer, I'm quite concerned about going in the water when it's that green. There are times that you can see that the green starts at about maybe, let's say, 20 meters from the shore. So between the shore and this bloom, the water is fine. And then all of a sudden it gets quite dark and green. And then this eventually will wash into shore. And these conditions can change very quickly. That one day you can't go in the water and the next day you can. So on our Facebook site for the beach, people are always saying, what's the condition of the water today? Can we go in or not? Anyway, having grandchildren now who like to go to the beach and play, it's quite worrisome, as our previous speaker said, for future generations. Should they even be playing in the water when it's like this? How toxic is this water? So about 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, we started talking to the other associations, cottage associations around the lake, particularly Hillside and Victoria Beach, Grand Beach. And we formed a coalition to save Lake Winnipeg. And I know Vicki had done some work with the lake, with her Save the Lake organization. We talked to her, we talked to the Lake Winnipeg Foundation, and we, as I said, we formed this coalition to save the lake. And our goal is really to provide information to people so that they're aware of the decisions being made at the variety of levels of government, from the municipalities to the city, to the province, to the federal government, because they all have a stake in the water as it enters into the lake. Being an advocate for healthy practices so that people are aware of what they can do to make a difference. And finally, the organization is encouraging people to speak up and to talk to the different politicians at the different levels about our concerns. So from the coalition, I joined the Manitoba Association of Cottage Owners, which has been quite good about posting information. Their previous mandate was really taxation focused, which was not an interest of mine. But my interest is in the environment. So Manitoba Association of Cottage Owners has taken that up as one of their major concerns and has been supportive and is posting all of our information on their website. The coalition writes newsletters approximately every 3 months and sends them out to whoever is interested. So if you're not on our list, on our mailing list, if you could maybe let Vicki know, and then she can forward that information to me, or however we can get that for you. The newsletters are very informative, and they're looking at the different decisions, as I said, that have been made at the city level, at the provincial level, and at the federal level. And we're giving you information. Currently, we're very concerned about the zebra mussel explosion. We have been trying to contact the provincial government, and they have not been great about getting back to us. They haven't at all. The municipalities have not heard back from the provincial government either. So between the algae, which has an effect on the mussels are filtering the water to take out all the particles so that the algae can grow. And there's a correlation between the two of them. In any case, what we're finding is that our beaches are being destroyed, and people who enjoy going to the beaches, the beautiful beaches that we have, some of the finest in the world, are finding that the experience is getting to be quite disgusting. And I think that this can have a huge economic impact and also of the obvious environmental impact. So our goal for the coalition is to continue to raise awareness and have people be aware so that they can speak up with knowledge about what is happening. Thanks, Vicki.
Thank you so much, Gordon. I appreciate your time tonight, but also all that you're doing with the Coalition to Save Lake Winnipeg. That's really important because I think things are only going to change if there's more of a mass of people who really start to complain. I've noticed a couple of questions on the chat that I thought I could jump in and answer, and then perhaps Janine, if you can let me know if there are other questions. I noticed one question. Somebody asked how much of the phosphorus and nitrogen that's getting into Lake Winnipeg comes from outside of Manitoba's borders. How much is coming? I guess a lot of it from the United States. Anyway, the answer to that that's really important to remember is almost 50% of the phosphorus and nitrogen that's getting into our lake and causing problems comes from within Manitoba's borders. So I've always thought, and I've heard a lot of other people say this, we really have to do a much better job here in Manitoba to clean up our act before we can put a lot of pressure on others to do so outside of our jurisdiction. I mean, doesn't that make sense that we have to do a better job here and then really put pressure on the others who are part of the Lake Winnipeg watershed? Another question that I think is very relevant to our discussion tonight, somebody asked, how much phosphorus and nitrogen is in human waste compared to pig waste? In other words, are they kind of equal? It's very interesting, but they're not. Actually, in a 52 kilogram pig, which they sort of generally call a feeder pig, compared to a 63 kilogram person, which maybe is the average size of an adult, there's actually there's more than 4 times as much phosphorus in pig manure as in human waste. And so that means if we look at it this way, 190 pigs would be producing the same amount of phosphorus and nitrogen in their waste as 1,000 humans. So if you look at the fact that we have 8 million pigs now in Manitoba, and our current government is saying they want to increase that to at least 10 million a year or more, that's, just think of 10 million times however many humans. I mean, it's astronomical. So I think that's really important for people to understand. I mean, as I said at the beginning, pig manure is a good fertilizer if it's applied in the right amount and all taken up by the crop. But when there's so much of it that's got to be gotten rid of, yeah.
Vicki, I just want to really emphasize that point by just doing some simple math. So 8 million hogs in Manitoba at any given time would produce the equivalent manure of over 32 million people. So imagine a city the size of 32 million people producing all this nitrogen and phosphorus, and there are regulations about how it's applied, but it's not being enforced. And I can share from personal experience that when I went to the RM of Hanover and said, could I have a copy of your spread acres, please, and see which barns are spreading on which fields, they gave them to me. And then I went to the provincial conservation department and asked for what spread acres they had. And I cross-referenced for our area here south of Steinbach. And I found farms, my neighboring farms, that were receiving the maximum load from 3 different barns because there was no regulation between the provincial allowance and the municipal allowances. They all have to have agreements. So that means in some cases, and I'm saying not every hog producer will overproduce like this, but because Hanover has such a high density and there's not a lot of space, there are large amounts of over applications happening. And we can see this and smell this in the RM of Labroquerie and the RM of Hanover through fish kills. We have many creeks, as our elders said. We have many creeks that I've seen, one that cross our land where I've lived for 40 years, that used to have fish, that used to have crayfish. And now there's nothing but duckweed, which is a sign of excess phosphorus. There's a nutrition source, so therefore the duckweed is growing thick and heavy across what used to be a creek. And my friends that live right on the Seine River report fish kills. All of a sudden there's all kinds of dead fish floating in the river. Well, somebody has let their lagoon go. So it's I just want to say there's someone that wants to ask a question. So Faylene, why don't you write it please in the chat, and then Vicki and I will respond to it. So write your question in the chat and then we'll respond to it. So just giving some more firsthand information about how the application rates that are outlined in our manure and mortalities management regulations, which are very good on paper, are not being enforced. And I have personally taken pictures of hoses, illegal hoses going into the ditch from some of my neighbors disposing of hog manure more quickly. And the conservation officers don't come to check it out. I send in the pictures and it's just not a priority for them. So there's a lot of what we call regulatory capture, where the government, which is supposed to be a water keeper, they're supposed to be protecting our water, is actually working with industry to bypass the regulations. And we have stories that that's why more hog producers are coming to Manitoba, because of our lax environmental regulations compared to other jurisdictions, which take better care of their water.
Thanks, Janine. I just wonder if we could ask Faylene to, since she was one of the speakers, would you like to just ask or make your comment now without typing it?
I was, I don't know how I put that hand up there, but I was looking to see where all the people were and I moved it and I must have touched a hand.
Oh, so you didn't really mean to? Oh, that's okay. Oh, okay, that's funny.
But you know, we just wanted to say that, you know, a lot of when I was reading, I had no idea that Winnipeg was allowed to dump so much sewage, raw sewage into the water until I was reading up this past month, and it is shocking. It's very shocking.
Shameful. Very shameful.
Mm-hmm.
But so is allowing people to make money and send, because 95% of the hogs, of those 8 million hogs that are being raised in Manitoba at any one time, producing the manure that's equal to what 35 million people would be producing, or 32 million, that all the manure stays here and goes into our water system. Yes, some goes into the soil and is used by crops, but way too much runs off. And I just want to reference, there's new research coming out. Henry Wilson at the Brandon Agricultural Research Center has published seasonality of phosphorus and nitrate retention. Oh, no, it's not that one. Impacts of soil phosphorus drawdown on snowmelt and rainfall runoff affecting water quality. And it's shown that it's not just in the spring when the snow melts, but anytime there's a heavy rain event, that's when a lot of the phosphorus, if it's applied too much in the field, that's when it leaches out into the ditches and our creeks and our rivers. So this overproduction, this over application of phosphorus that we're seeing in many areas that currently have a lot of hog barns, it's going to increasingly be a problem, and a problem that we will be leaving to our children and our grandchildren to clean up. And that just is not ethical to do things that way. It's just not ethical.
No, I couldn't agree more. I think it's important to mention the really good piece that we saw on CBC television, CBC News last night. It was about regenerative agriculture and how important that is going to be in terms of decreasing carbon emissions, but also all the other benefits that come from conducting agriculture in a regenerative manner. So if any of you are interested in seeing that piece, you can just go onto the CBC National website, and there's actually a little video about it. It was very encouraging. They actually showed that they had a number of barns with pigs, but the pigs were outside on straw, and then it was clear that they would go back into the barn probably at night and so on. But they were, anyway, it was really encouraging because it was quite a large farm, I think, but obviously it was organic and being managed in a really good way. I noticed on a comment that someone, oh, here's a question that I think we should answer. How is a straw-based better for nutrients? A straw-based system for pigs. Janine, do you want to take a crack at that, or?
Happy to answer that. Well, right off the bat, if you're concerned about the pigs being healthy, and when animals are healthy, then they don't need antibiotics. If they've given good feed, and a pig needs to root. Its whole body is designed for that nose and its thick head and shoulders, its thick neck. It's designed to toss in the ground, and so it wants to root. And when it's on a flat floor, not only does it have nothing to root, so that stresses it. It can't express its innate piggishness, which is to root in the ground. So that stresses it, which makes it more likely to be sick. And then the stress of those little hooves, those pointed hooves on a slat floor, so it's hard for them. They get hoof injuries going into the slat and the slatted floors, so the manure and feces runs down. But pigs only relieve themselves in a designated area in the pen. So most of the pen should have some kind of bedding for them that they can root in. Plus, when you give enough bedding to an animal, the carbon-nitrogen ratio of carbon in the straw to the nitrogen in their manure and the phosphorus in the manure, it ranges anywhere from 20 to 1 to 40 to 1. And that's what you want, 20 to 40 parts of carbon to 1 to 20 parts of manure, nitrogen. And that's the perfect ratio for it composting and breeding the beneficial microorganisms that then turn it into soil. And so when you have pigs on a straw-based system, it's much easier to compost their manure, and the volume of manure reduces by 2/3, making it much more stable so that it doesn't leach off, because there are microorganisms living there holding the nutrients. And the phosphorus is held as well. The phosphorus, there's much less runoff. So compost condenses the phosphorus and the nitrogen, condenses the nutrients. But because it's in an environment that has bedding for the bacteria, for the microorganisms, the actinomycetes and all of the thousands of creatures, there's more different kinds of life forms under the soil than above it. So there's way more than we know living in the soil that helps stabilize the nutrients. And that's what organic systems do. They strive to stabilize the nutrients through proper composting, use of manure, use of inputs carefully selected to be non-synthetic, to work with their environment to create a stable soil that gets the nutrients cycling, but you have to be making compost and putting it back in. So that's just a little bit about why the straw is so important in raising pigs.
Okay, great. Now, is there a monetary incentive for someone to collect this manure and sell it? If you're talking about the liquid manure, no, there is the liquid manure, even though it in some cases is a very good fertilizer, it's just too expensive and too heavy to haul it very far. And so it really is not available to be sold. The composted manure, I'm not sure about that. I guess it would probably be something similar. You'd probably want to just be using it fairly close to where it's being collected.
Yeah, compost is heavy, so it has to be in areas where there's a lot of crop production. And unfortunately, in our area, we do have one operator that's composting his cattle manure. He's got an actual compost turner and does produce the compost. But he's in an area that's relatively marshy, and so the soil, even with that compost, doesn't produce very well, and so he hasn't had adequate markets for it. So yes, it could be marketed. But you see, that's the way the moratorium happened. The previous government didn't create a moratorium against more hog barns. All they said is you have to compost your manure. You have to separate the water out of it and then compost the solids. But the hog industry didn't want to do that. They said that's too expensive, which I can't believe that it is. It's just different than the model. We were asking them to change their production model a little bit, and they didn't want to do that. But yes, animals should be, like all of organic is based on land-based agriculture, that the animals should be on the land. And when you confine 5,000 hogs to one barn, that's just counter to every principle of respecting nature, because it concentrates the manure in such a way that it's just not, that it's very difficult to deal with that volume of manure. And the other way that it's subsidized is none of these intensive barns are paying for the water they use. So they're pumping huge amounts of water out of the aquifers, and they're making it into this slurry that makes the manure too heavy and expensive to ship. And then they're spreading it on the soil, so it runs off into the creeks and is leading to that phosphorus increase, nutrient increase in Lake Winnipeg. So it's the whole production model that needs to change. And we need more Manitobans to know that even though this is providing some very low quality jobs for some people, we are being used as a toilet by, Maple Leaf Canada. And we really need to be saying, hey, enough is enough. 8 million hogs is enough. We don't want to go up to 10 million. Look at the negative impacts, hence the reason for this webinar series.
That's right. And actually right now there are several communities that are really trying to stop high life from building several more huge barns. But the Manitoba government has in some ways decreased the control of local authorities to make decisions about this. So we're afraid that those barns are going to go ahead, even though there are really large numbers of people living in that area that don't want them. I hope they're able to stop them. But I noticed one other comment about why these pig barns have slatted floors. The idea was, the person commenting said that is so that the animals don't have to stand in their own waste, and that is absolutely true. The urine and feces falls through the slats into a pit underneath the barn. The terrible thing about that is that there's a lot of noxious fumes that come from that pit, ammonia, hydrogen sulfide. So there has to be very good ventilation systems in order for the pigs to survive. We know of a couple of instances in the last couple of years where there was a power outage and the generators, backup generators, must not have worked, and the pigs all suffocated to death within a couple of hours. So it really is not a healthy environment for those animals to be living in. If they were on straw, the straw kind of, and and if they have enough room, they choose to use one area almost like their bathroom as a waste area, and the rest of the areas where they eat and sleep. I've been in barns where their pigs are on straw, and that's really what they do. These are intelligent animals. So
and they don't have nearly the odor, because what you're smelling in the air, like the hydrogen sulfide, the bacteria in the feces binds with the straw, and it starts the natural composting process, which doesn't have any scent when it's aerated properly. Like healthy compost facilities are the opposite of stinky hog barns. But yet, what's our tax system? If you build a compost platform, you're taxed on it per square foot. But if you dig a big pit in the ground to put liquid manure in it, that's tax exempt. So there are many areas of change that we need to work about, and supporting the kind of sustainable agriculture that Quebec is looking at, because they've run up, being high hog producers, they've run up against problems. So they've switched over, the company Du Breton and others have switched over to organic hog production. And it's a $25 million a year enterprise, but they have government support. Whereas in Manitoba, all the government support is for this one industrial model. And those few farmers that still produce at home for their farm gate market, they say they sell absolutely everything they raise because it tastes so much better and it's meeting the needs of the community. Last week, we interviewed Andreas Zinn from Zinn Farms, and he talked about that. They're producing as much as they can sell because, because the demand is so high. But no, it's not, pork is not, somebody's saying, don't we have a responsibility to feed the world? If we don't actually, if we would just support local agriculture, there's lots of production that's going to export for rich nations that could be grown for local food production. That's often misunderstood. We don't have a food production issue. We produce way more food than would feed everyone in the world. We have a food distribution issue. The food is not distributed properly. So that is what causes the issue. Is the distribution is not equitable because food is a commodity instead of a right, and the system set up for international trade rather than meeting the needs of local people. So feeding the world is not a rationale for us producing pork and putting up with all that millions of tons of manure that's not being composted properly or applied in a sustainable way to our crops, which could happen if we had a different model. A different production model.
Janine, I might have missed it, but did you comment on the situation in Quebec? There is about 10% of their hog production there organic, or
I believe that's it. I just know it in terms of a $25 million a year industry. So that's fairly large. Yes. And a part of that is being driven by the the northeast coast of the United States is very high in population. And it seems that when people get concentrated in cities, they want to buy more organic food. They want to make sure that the farms are not causing pollution. It's kind of strange because people that live in the country tend to think that the countryside is still pure and healthy, unless you have a giant industrial hog barn near you, and then you know that it's not. But we could be producing a different way. My grandpa raised hogs. My grandpa had 50 sows. And one of the first things I remember was helping him. He said, come on, we're going to get this sow had gotten out and nested in the haystack that was just a giant pile of hay. And he rattled the pail that contained the feed, and out she came with 13 healthy little babies behind her. And I remember what good mothers they are, how they love to create a nest. I crawled in there. It was perfectly clean. It was a beautiful nest. You could really tell the intelligence and love and care of the animal, and that she had these 13 healthy babies. So I watched my grandpa. This was just outside of Minnedosa, Manitoba. But it was something that is just not being done. They just destroyed the small farm where many people could earn a decent side income in place of this industrial model with these huge barns with 5,000 animals in them. So it's a really different way of looking at how our food is produced. And more as we analyze what is the climate change impacts of our food production models, we're moving away from these industrialized, intensified systems and looking to go back to the smaller farm model. We need to do that here in Manitoba. Go back to, we used to have almost 2,000 farmers producing hogs. Now we've got less than 700 because they're not really farmers. And so those of us, just like the elders that spoke with us this evening and shared their vision, those of us that have seen it being done a different way, know how intelligent and caring these animals are and how satisfying it can be to raise them in a totally different model. We just have to speak up for change. So I do urge you to go to hogwatchmanitoba.ca and keep in touch with this, and please do follow our actions. We've got a letter writing campaigns. We need to get more and more Manitobans writing to governments on many different levels, writing to corporations and saying, please be more sustainable in how you're treating these animals, how you're treating your workers, and how you're treating our environment.
Absolutely. Okay, well, I'm not sure that there's any more questions we can really answer. Janine, do you think we've come to about the end of our talk for tonight?
Yes, I think so. I know there was some request to share LinkedIn contact information. I am on LinkedIn, but I couldn't find how to, you just have to look for Janine G. Gibson. I think it says I'm an organic verification officer or organic inspector. In the States, we're called organic inspectors. In Canada, we're verification officers. The Canadian Food Inspection Agency, which oversees organic certification, didn't want us to be confused with their inspectors. So, but anyway, happy to share experience in, with more humane production and hoping we can get back to those days. So thanks again to all the speakers tonight, and thank you, Vicki, for your time and effort in sharing your information with us this evening.
Okay, thank you, everybody. And remember, this will be, recording will be on the Hogwatch Manitoba website within a couple of days in case you want to send anybody to watch it. Okay, thanks so much for hosting, Janine.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you, Vicki. And thanks again to our dear speakers. Miigwech.
Yes, miigwech.
Be well, everyone. Be well.
Thank you.
Good night.